I've been asked what is the best way to swap out colours when you are making something that uses more than one colour. And it's a bit of a tricky one to answer because it's down to personal preference. What I've done here is, I'll show you in a minute as well. So I'm just making granny squares here. But I've swapped my colours out and I've fastened off, but it does leave an end. Okay, now with those ends, I will probably just weave them in afterwards. I don't mind doing that, that's fine. I'll just get my darning needle on my crochet hook and I'll weave the ends in. And sometimes I also use the ends to seam the pieces together. So it's not a complete waste, and I think there is a purpose to having some ends left over to use. So I will use that again to join squares. I don't have a problem with that. I've been asked about carrying the yarn across the square, and that is another valid method, but I don't like doing it, and I'll tell you why. It uses up yarn. So yarn that I might otherwise use to make my next square, or to seam up with, or to do a nice border with, I've wasted carrying it across the square. And also, when you expand the square, you'll be able to see the yarn underneath. The best way to hide it would be to use a much smaller hook. But again, it's all down to personal preference. So I'll just show you how I swap out my colours, and you might want to do the same. It's up to you. So there's two ways I'll show you. So the first way is, I'll just start again. So say I've just chained 2 and I've got to the end of my granny square. I will insert my hook into the first double crochet of the round, and that was the chain that we made. And I have a couple of choices here. So what I normally do is I will just slip across until I get to the next chain space. What you can also do is just turn the square around and do a simple slip stitch into that chain space. Okay, so I've just turned it around. If you're not too bothered about wrong side, right side, and so on, this might work for you. So this is method 1, turning the piece around. So method 1, here it goes. So I've turned it around, I've done the slip stitch in the white yarn, but I no longer need the white yarn. So I'm going to do a clasp weft join, which is where we take colour 2 and we lay it over colour 1. So you see it's just kind of like that at the moment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull on both, so those 2 strands plus this 1 strand, to create a bit of tension. Now I've got hold of colour 1 in my right hand and colour 2 is in my left hand. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to chain 2 or 3 stitches because I'm doing double crochet. So I've chained with the new one, and I'm just going to make my double crochets as I would normally. Okay, and that was with the second colour, and it's neatly tidied away the ends, nice and simple for me. And this is one way of doing it. So again, it's personal preference. This is method 1, which is to turn around and do a clasp weft join. Now you can still do the clasp weft join when you just continue anti-clockwise or clockwise, depending on if you are left-handed or right-handed. I am showing you how to do it as though you are right-handed, but you find a way of doing it that is comfortable for you. There are no crochet please. So yeah, if I turn it around, it's tidy. It's a tidy start. So that will leave me with 1 fewer end to weave in. So that's method 1, and I'll show you method 2. Method 2 is where we continue in an anti-clockwise direction and we swap out the colour when we get to the chain space. Now, what I do is, well, you have two choices really. What you can either do is you can either get to the top of the first turn and chain that you made and fasten off there, then pick up later somewhere else. You can do it that way if you want, or you can slip across to the chain space. So that's one stitch. This is the second one. I'm just going to slip across to the chain space, okay? And that's usually how I do my corners. I slip across to the corner because you don't finish on a corner. So here we are at the corner. I have slipped into the chain space, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take colour 2. I'm going to cut it off first because that won't work. Take colour 2, do the clasp weft join again. Oh, come back. Clasp weft join again. So do it this way. Okay, so remember, you just kind of loop it over, create some tension there by pulling at both ends. And this would actually work better if that was in that hand there. So yeah, create some tension, hold single strand in one hand and then obviously the looped over one in the other. Chain your stitches again as you did previously. Don't worry if it's looking a bit chunky because it's doubled over, it will just blend in. Then I'm going to make my crochet stitches. Okay, so I've continued clockwise, anti-clockwise, sorry, this way, and I did the same thing. I did the clasp weft join, which is brilliant if you are using a lot of scrap yarns or several different colours. It's a way of joining that leaves you with fewer ends to weave in, and it's just great. It takes up a lot less time. So we've done the 3 double crochets. Now the only flaw that I see with doing it this way is that when you slip across, especially if you're using a yarn that changes colour or pattern or striped, so I'm using a variegated there, so this is like a self-patterning pink and white yarn, so obviously when I've come around and gone here, that colour is no longer pink. Now I'm not bothered about this because I'm doing this kind of pink and white theme granny square anyway, so it doesn't really matter if there's a bit of white blotching in and out. I don't really care. It's just a scrap blanket. It's going to be a doll blanket for my daughter, so you know, I don't mind that it's looking a bit patchy like that, but it might bother you if the slip stitches at the top are a different colour, or it might not. It's totally up to you. Again, personal preference. I will show you the other way that you can do it. So I'll just uncouple my yarns there, and I will take it back to where I chained to. Oh, come on. Right, so chain 2, and then I'm still going to slip stitch into the top of the first turn and chain, which counts as the first stitch. Okay, but I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to slip across to the corner. I'm just going to stop there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the yarn. Okay, and I'm going to fasten off. So just pull through and it ties itself in a knot. Now obviously you just have a bit of yarn sitting there now. Not much to worry about. And you can pick up wherever you want, any corner. So say I wanted to pick up in this corner. I'll just put my hook in and I'll get colour 2. And I will simply slip it over the hook like so. Okay, but I'm holding both strands together because it's kind of like a clasp weft join here. I'm just making sure that I don't have a lot of ends. So right into the chain space, and I'm going to chain 3. Again, don't worry if it's chunky, it balances out. And I just start making my crochet stitches here. So this way of doing it, I've completely disconnected from the original yarn where I ended the round, and it's just another way of changing colours. It's up to you however you want to do it. Some people really don't mind weaving the ends in. Now, I'll show you as well what I'm going to do here. So this is where I cut off the last piece, isn't it? I'm going to just go into that chain space, and you can see the yarn's kind of limping over there. So I'm just going to go into that chain space and make the double crochets over that yarn. And that is just to make sure that it is fastened in place. So I've got 3 loops on the hook now to make my double crochet. I'm just going to loop. This is the tail end of that previous yarn. I'm just going to tie it in with my crochet hook there, you see? And then get it over those last 2 loops. And it's kind of tidied away now. So you can do it that way. What I will say is when it comes to swapping colours in and out and in and out, it does look better, in my opinion, if you just weave the ends in, because those ends, once they are sewn in or crocheted in, however you want to do it, they reinforce all of the stitches and they hold them in place. Now, I don't know who you're going to be giving your blankets to, but I find that if I'm giving my blanket to a small child who might use it to make blanket forts as well as picnic mats, or just use it on their bed, and use it boisterously, and it'll be in the wash a lot as well if it's got dirty. I find that doing the weaving in method works fine, because it just helps the granny square stay stronger for longer. I'll show you how to weave in a minute. I'll show you how to weave in your ends here. Now, as with any knitting or crochet hobby, everybody wants simple, seamless ways of not having any ends to weave in. And while that is something that would make things a bit easier in the short term, I don't actually believe they would make the piece stand up to the test of time. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So, say for example, this end here, if I pull on that tight, that was the slip stitch that I started this granny square with. Now, if I was to just cut that off, I'm leaving the granny square vulnerable, because any pressure, any tension pulling it apart, like giving it to small children, for example, any tension could unravel the center of this square. And this is why weaving in ends is a good option. So you can do it one of 2 ways. You can either do it with a darning needle. So I have one with a really large eye because I'm using chunky yarn, or a crochet hook. I'm using one that is slightly smaller than the one I used to make this. So this is 4.5mm. I used a 6 to make the square. Use the crochet hook if you have a short amount of yarn. So say you were using scraps and there's only a little bit left. Okay, so all I'm going to do is I'm just wrapping it over the hook and I'm slipping it through where I have some stitches. So you see under the stitch, as if I was doing a front post or back post, just weaving it through there. Okay, and I'm going to keep doing that. So wherever there's a loop in a similar colour as well, I'm not just doing it through a different colour. And all that does is it just tidies the end away. And you don't have to see it right through to the very end. I said end a lot here. You can simply, all I've done is I've brought it from here up to here. And I'm threading it through, and I'm just going to do one last stitch and a fasten off, okay, into a nice little knot. So that gives it a stronger chance than if it was just left there, okay, because, well, it's been double knotted now, hasn't it? And if you want, you can just slip your hook through the bottom of one of those clusters and keep pulling it through until you can't see it anymore. And again, you know that if it does happen where it does start to come apart, for example, you know that there's 2 lifelines until you get to the original stitch. Okay, so you can keep weaving it through. It's already been knotted, so we don't have to panic too much if it pops out. And if you want to cut it again, you absolutely can. It's your blanket. You do what you want there. So that's the crochet hook method. So tie it, weave it up, tie it again, then weave it through the bottom of these clusters. Okay, so there's one method. And you can see on the other side, it's not there. Okay, so I've got rid of it there and it's tidied away. Now here we have another slip stitch, and an option you can do for this is to use a darning needle. So I'm using one with a really large eye because this is a chunky yarn and I don't want to lose the will to live. So I'm going to weave through as if I was sewing. Okay, so I'll just go through a couple of those in the bottom, and then I'll go through a couple of these in the bottom. Just keep weaving it through. And I'm not going to pull on it too tightly. I'm just pulling on it enough to tidy it up and pack it away. Okay, you need to leave yarn that I suppose is long enough to be able to thread through a needle, but not too long, because otherwise you'll just be weaving in ends for hours. But I do think I stand by what I said, where it reinforces the square. And as well as that, if the time ever did come to repair the piece, which, you know, it could well happen, especially if it becomes an heirloom blanket and you've had it for a long time, when it's time to repair, you have matching yarn there that's been woven in, or, you know, you've weaved in the ends with it, so there's quite a bit there that you can use. That's just an idea. I'm sure there will still be yarn in the future. It's a scary thought, isn't it? But, you know, you just keep tidying it up, tidying it away. Now, there is a method where you can make your granny squares whilst carrying the other yarn along with you. But I don't like that method because if you pull, if there's a bit of tension, you can see the other yarn. See what I mean? Now, that could be every single round. And then I find that would just use up too much yarn then, because you'd be carrying it all the way around. So what might be best is just to suck it up and weave in your ends. Okay? And for some, weaving in the ends is therapeutic in itself. You could take a lot of the work out and weave in the ends as you go. Right, so I've gone full circle here, so I'm all the way back around. Yeah, you don't have to wait to weave in the ends till the whole blanket is made. You can weave in the ends after each square is made, and although it seems like a lot of work there and then, it might save you some time at the end, especially if it's a gift that you're making and you've got a time limit. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, this is a lot of yarn that I've saved. I'm just going to keep threading it through. And that's all you're doing really, you're just weaving it in so that it's nice and tidy and it's away. Because if you were giving this to someone, you don't really want the recipient to see. And what I'll do here is I'll just bring my crochet hook back into the fold, and I'm going to fasten off because I'm sick of it now. And then because that's been knotted and fastened off and it's already woven in, I'm just going to cut it. See? There we go. So I'm going to do the same for the others, but the one on the outside, I'm going to save this and I'm going to use it to sew up, because then no yarn is wasted. And another little tip, if you keep the little bits that you've cut off, that you've snipped, you can store them and actually use them to stuff some amigurumi.